Before he became one of cinema's most unforgettable villains, he was just a quiet boy with an extraordinary gift. A voice that could fill an entire room. A presence that could make people listen. But how did Tim Curry turn that remarkable voice into a career that lasted for decades? How did a quiet boy become one of the most recognizable performers in theater, film, television, and voice acting? And after a devastating stroke, how did he find the strength to rebuild his life? This is the incredible story of Tim Curry. A story of talent, courage, setbacks, adaptation, and determination. In today's Tim Curry's incredible life story, you will travel through the remarkable moments that shaped his life and career, from a young choir boy to an unforgettable performer, and finally, to a man who learned to keep moving forward, even when life changed everything. And while listening, you will also improve your English through storytelling, build your vocabulary, and strengthen your English listening skills. So, put on your headphones, relax, and listen carefully. Because this is the story of Tim Curry. Let's begin. Part 1. The Quiet Boy Who Found His Voice. Before Tim Curry became one of cinema's most unforgettable villains, he was a quiet boy growing up in England. Timothy James Curry was born in 1946 in Cheshire, but much of his childhood was spent in Plymouth, where his father's work in the Royal Navy meant that the family moved several times. And somewhere inside that changing childhood, a remarkable talent was beginning to grow: his voice. Curry began singing in church when he was only about 6 or 7 years old. He became a talented boy soprano. Music taught him control, rhythm, breath, and expression. But singing was not his only passion. He was becoming fascinated by acting. He discovered that performance could transform a person. A quiet boy could step onto a stage and become someone completely different. Under the lights, he could find confidence. He could experiment. He could become someone else. After his father's death, Curry continued his education and eventually attended Kingswood School in Bath. There, his interest in acting grew stronger. Then came university. At the University of Birmingham, he studied drama and English. But Curry did not want to spend his life only studying performance. He wanted to experience it. He wanted to perform. He wanted to learn by doing. And soon, the stage became his real classroom. In 1968, he landed his first professional acting job in the London production of Hair. It was a bold beginning, and there he met Richard O'Brien. That meeting would become extremely important, because several years later, O'Brien was creating a strange and experimental musical. He needed an actor with a powerful voice, strong theatrical instincts, and the ability to become completely unpredictable. He remembered Tim Curry. Curry auditioned, and something extraordinary happened. The quiet boy from England revealed a completely different side of himself. Confident, theatrical, fearless, unforgettable. That audition would lead to a character that changed his life forever. Dr. Frank-N-Furter. But Curry was about to discover that one role could make an actor famous while creating a completely different challenge. How do you become unforgettable without becoming trapped by the character that made you famous? Part 2. The voice that created an icon. Some actors disappear inside their characters. Tim Curry did something different. He made his characters impossible to ignore. In 1973, he stepped onto the stage as Dr. Frank-N-Furter in Richard O'Brien's The Rocky Horror Show. And suddenly, that quiet performer had become something completely different. Flamboyant, confident, provocative, magnetic. But the character was not created by appearance alone. Curry's greatest weapon was his voice. His delivery was precise. His articulation was deliberate, and his unusual vocal quality gave every sentence a distinctive character. He could stretch a word, slow down a phrase, change his pitch, or suddenly increase the intensity. The effect was hypnotic. Frank-N-Furter could sound playful, then commanding, then dangerous. Sometimes, within the same scene, that vocal flexibility became one of Curry's greatest strengths. And then, the stage show became a phenomenon. The Rocky Horror Show attracted devoted audiences. When the film adaptation arrived in 1975, Curry reprised the role. The movie eventually became a legendary cult classic. Audiences returned again and again. They memorized the dialogue. They dressed as the characters. They turned screenings into events. And at the center of it all was Tim Curry. But fame can create a strange problem. When one character becomes bigger than the actor, people may begin to see only that character. Curry could have remained there. He could have played different versions of Frank-N-Furter again and again. Instead, he took a risk. He moved into different kinds of work. Drama, comedy, fantasy, horror, television, and eventually Hollywood. That decision revealed something important about Tim Curry. He was not simply an actor with a memorable voice. He was a shapeshifter. He could change his appearance, his rhythm, his accent, his energy, and even the emotional temperature of a scene. The character that made him famous opened the door, but Curry's versatility would keep that door open for decades. And soon, Hollywood would discover that the man behind Frank-N-Furter could make almost any character unforgettable. Part 3. The villain who could make you laugh. What makes a villain memorable? Is it fear, power, cruelty, or could it be charm? Tim Curry understood something unusual. A great villain does not always have to frighten you. Sometimes he can make you laugh. Sometimes he can make you curious. And sometimes you remember him long after the hero is forgotten. Curry brought that quality to many of his most famous roles. In legend, he became the Lord of Darkness. The character was enormous, dark, and visually unforgettable. But underneath the makeup was Curry's voice, deep, controlled, theatrical, menacing. Then came Clue, and suddenly the atmosphere changed. Curry played Wadsworth, the mysterious butler, with rapid dialogue, sharp timing, and a wonderfully controlled sense of comedy. He could deliver a line with complete seriousness and make the audience laugh. That ability to balance menace and humor became one of his trademarks. Then, in Home Alone 2, he appeared as the hotel concierge. It was a smaller role, but Curry understood how to make small moments memorable. A look, a pause, a raised eyebrow, a carefully chosen word. He understood that performance was often about timing. And then there was another world where his voice could work without his face. Animation. Voice acting allowed Curry to create characters using almost nothing but sound. Tone could reveal arrogance. Pitch could suggest fear. Pacing could create suspense. And rhythm could turn an ordinary sentence into something unforgettable. He worked on numerous animated projects and became a respected voice performer. But this was the real secret of Tim Curry. He did not simply play villains. He created personalities, distinctive personalities that audiences could recognize instantly. And that made him more than a Hollywood villain. He became a performer whose greatest instrument was his ability to transform. But after decades of transforming into other people, Curry would face a challenge that no costume could hide and no performance could solve. In 2012, his life changed dramatically. This time, there would be no character to play, only reality. Part 4. the moment everything changed. Sometimes, life changes in a single moment. For Tim Curry, that moment came in July 2012. He suffered a severe stroke while having a massage. His masseur realized that something was wrong and called an ambulance. That quick response helped Curry receive medical attention when he needed it most. At the hospital, he underwent emergency treatment, including a craniectomy, to relieve pressure on his brain. For weeks, he could not speak. The stroke left him partially paralyzed, particularly on the left side of his body. Walking became difficult. Eventually, he relied on a wheelchair. For an actor, this was devastating. His career had depended on movement, physical expression, stage presence, and the ability to transform himself in front of an audience. Now, even ordinary movement could require enormous effort. But Curry had faced difficult moments before, and once again, he adapted. Recovery was not an overnight transformation. It was slow, patient, exhausting. He spent months in rehabilitation, learning how to live with his changed circumstances. There was another challenge, too. Memory. Curry later spoke about problems with his short-term memory, another lasting effect of the stroke. Yet something important remained. His personality, his humor, his creativity, and perhaps most importantly, his voice. So, he changed direction. Instead of depending as heavily on physical performance, he increasingly focused on voice work. He continued acting. He appeared at fan events. He stayed connected with audiences. And he continued to work, even though his body could no longer do everything it once had. That is what makes his journey so remarkable. He did not pretend that nothing had changed. Everything had changed. He simply refused to believe that change meant the end. Curry transformed himself again. But this time, he was not transforming for a role. He was adapting to life itself. And for more than a decade, he continued moving forward, one day at a time. One challenge at a time. One step at a time. Until eventually, another chapter began. A quieter chapter, but one that revealed the true resilience behind the legendary performer. Part 5. His final chapter. After the stroke, Tim Curry's life became quieter. But quieter did not mean empty. He continued working. He continued meeting fans. And he continued finding ways to stay connected to the world of entertainment. His voice, the instrument that had helped define his career, was still there. So, he used it. He continued working in voice acting, a form of performance that allowed him to create characters without depending as heavily on physical movement. He also appeared at conventions where generations of fans came to see him. For some, he was Frank-N-Furter. For others, Pennywise, Wadsworth, the Lord of Darkness, or one of the many voices that had become part of their lives. But behind all those characters was a man adapting to a new reality. Curry also revealed that doctors had discovered an abdominal aneurysm. It added another layer of uncertainty to an already difficult journey. Yet, he continued. In 2025, he published his memoir, Vagabond. The book offered a deeper look into his extraordinary life, his career, his experiences, and the challenges he had faced. Then, on August 25th, 2026, Tim Curry died peacefully at his home in Toluca Lake in Los Angeles. He was 80 years old. His longtime manager, Marcia Hurwitz, confirmed his death. But his exact cause of death was not publicly disclosed. So, it would be wrong to say that his stroke or his aneurysm was confirmed as the cause. What we do know is that Curry lived for more than a decade with the lasting effects of his stroke. And despite those challenges, he continued creating, continued connecting, continued appearing, continued smiling. Because his final years were not simply a story about illness. They were a story about adaptation. His body had changed. His career had changed. His life had changed. But his identity as an artist never disappeared. And when Tim Curry finally left the stage, he left behind something that no illness could take away. A voice that millions would remember. Part 6. The Legacy That Remains. So, what remains when an extraordinary performer is gone? The characters, the voices, the memories, and the influence left behind. Tim Curry's career lasted for nearly 6 decades. He worked in theater, film, television, music, animation, and voice acting. He received 3 Tony Award nominations for Amadeus, My Favorite Year, and Spamalot. He also won a Daytime Emmy for his voice performance in Peter Pan and the Pirates. But awards can only tell part of the story. His real legacy lives in his characters. Frank-N-Furter showed audiences the power of theatrical freedom. The Lord of Darkness showed how transformation and vocal control could create cinematic menace. Wadsworth showed how timing could turn dialogue into comedy. And Pennywise showed how a voice, a smile, and a terrifying presence could remain in the imagination for decades. But Curry's legacy goes beyond his roles. He showed that a performer could be dramatic, comic, frightening, elegant, and ridiculous all at once. He also proved that reinvention is possible, even after life changes everything. Now, let's bring that lesson back to English. Today, you heard words like versatility, resilience, adaptation, and determination. These are not just vocabulary words. They are tools for expressing real ideas in English. So, choose 3 words from today's story. Write 1 sentence with each word. Then, read your sentences aloud, slowly, clearly, and confidently. Because English is not only about memorizing words, it is about using them to tell your own story. Tim Curry spent his life using his voice to become unforgettable. And now it is your turn. Find your voice, use it, practice it, and keep going. because sometimes the most powerful performance is simply refusing to stop. This was the incredible life story of Tim Curry. So, keep listening, keep learning, keep speaking English, and never be afraid to find your own voice.